Good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to the 7th session of Foro Transformations. Today I have the great pleasure to introduce you the architect David Kohn. He studied architecture in the University of Cambridge and in the Columbia in New York. And he worked in Caruso St John Architects. We have that office 3 years ago here, making a lecture. And he established his own studio in London since 2007. And for me, his work is an innovation that is cultivated in his office through the research with the materials, with the construction techniques, and the cultural context of the projects. The practice of David Kohn's studio won the UK Young Architecture of the Year in 2009 and the UK House Architecture of the Year in 2010. It's a young studio, but with a big career for the moment. David also teaches architecture in the London Metropolitan School and is a PhD with the Marie Curie Fellow in Belgium. David work for me is a personal approach into a world that he tries to create a strong relation because three things that for me are very important in architecture: life, places, and techniques. Thank you, David, for being here. And we are going to enjoy with his lecture, and we receive our guest with a big applause. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. It's always a really great pleasure to be in Barcelona. It's a city that I have now been to probably twice a year for the last 4 or 5 years, particularly because I've been working on a project in the Barrio Gótico, Carriavigno. Through that project, I've made many friends, and I've also enjoyed working with Catalan craftspeople and developed a lot of relationships that are ongoing. I'm going to talk about one of those in particular with Mosaic Martí later. So the lecture this evening really focuses on the project at Carriavigno, and this year, can you see me? No. Should I try and turn this on? It's a bit better. But I can't see you. Can we put the lights on them as well? It was better when I was talking. No? Now it feels like I'm on this stage. Okay, I'll keep going. So the apartment at Carriavigno won World Interior of the Year, and so for a year it's been a very important project to talk. Okay, I think that's better for me. Yeah, it's better for you. Okay. Because of the critical reception of that project, probably our office has been more aware of the importance of the interior in the work of the office. And I think that the project has also allowed us to get closer to a thesis about the relationship between the experience of living in a city and how the city is made. So the title, The City and Its Interior, I guess it implies that the city has an inside, and that also maybe from that inside one can understand the whole. And the whole, for me, most importantly, is the social whole. So the people that not only commission architecture, the people who live in it, but also the people who make it. So I'm going to start with a short story, if you like, and then I'm going to talk about 2 projects, Carriavigno and A Room for London. This is a drawing by the British artist David Kohn. It's called A Portrait of Margaret and Ken. and it was drawn in 2002. And I really love this drawing. I think because you're looking at them, but they are certainly looking at you. And the eyes are somehow the focus of the drawing, along with the camera. So there's this very strong dialogue between the gaze of the artist and that of the sitter. I also like the fact that they seem to understand more than you do. It's like they understand the painter, or David Hockney. And I also think probably the people who live in the work that we make, and the people that make the work, are probably the beginning and the end of our work. And it is around these relationships that the architecture develops. These are drawings then of objects that belong to Alessandro Mendini. So these are his carpets. And this was published in an article in Abitare, which is about his house. And in that article, he catalogued his belongings. And so the connection between the portraits and these drawings is the idea that maybe in every object there is the memory of those that choose them, and that there is a kind of personal architecture that begins with the body and how you inhabit space that then can aggregate to make architecture. So rather than understanding the city from a bird's eye view looking down, maybe we can understand the city from the body to its immediate surroundings. And these are more of his drawings of his furniture, and he's grouping them. So there's this idea that maybe one is beginning to organize an interior or a space through the identifying and then putting in some kind of order the furniture that you have. And this is Juan Gris' La Fenêtre Ouverte. So maybe if one understands the person and one understands their lives and the objects that allow them to live, one can begin to place them in a context. And what I particularly enjoy about this painting is that it introduces the idea of a story within a story. So if one understands the space of a painting to be this illusionistic space, that within a gallery on a wall there is this rectangle, and through this rectangle is another world, an imagined world, the world that the painter is presenting to you. In this painting, there's the implication of the world that you are in being reproduced within the space of the painting, and there is another illusionary space through the window at the back. So it is a painting about looking at paintings. And this is something then that is a recurring theme in our work and the projects I'm going to show you, is the experience of or a certain degree of self-consciousness about understanding oneself within this situation of gazing at the city. This is then maybe a yet more sculptural way to understand the same trajectory. But if one understands the objects that we live with, if one understands a need to organize them, this is Aldo Rossi's Teatro Domestico from 1985. And here he's arranging a cafetière in a building as though the building is for the object. And so there's this constant playing with scale. It was then turned into a kind of scale building. And this is in the Triennale in Milan. So this is the public staircase. And this very large piece of furniture is installed within the public staircase. And then it houses both a kind of doll's house bedroom, but then also these out-of-scale coffee pots. So the objects become personified. They take the scale of people. Maybe the objects are living in the house. There's this constant interchange between scales and the possibility of one identifying with one's own possessions, and that those possessions also then are able to identify with the city. So maybe this is then yet another extreme, is, you know, the coffee pot as a building, and this is the Teatro del Mundo from 1979. So this was a floating theatre designed by Aldo Rossi that he then toured from Venice to Dubrovnik. And the idea that maybe the individual and their objects in space, in an interior, ultimately allows access to an idea of a landscape and the city itself. Lastly, these are two photographs that I took about, this is 15 years ago. This is a photograph of London, and it's on the very edges of London. So this is the River Thames, and this is a kind of wasteland. But this couple is here to relax and enjoy themselves and somehow enjoy this rather post-industrial view of a city. And I somehow want to bring the full extreme of the individual, their objects, and the edge of the city together in this talk. And lastly, this is a photograph I took in Sicily. And again, this idea, so everyone looks at Aldo Rossi's furniture with the objects in and these scalar games. What I loved about this place was this column base implies a castle, a kind of an absolutely enormous building. But yet right by it is someone's living room, and then right in front of it is a petrol station. And this idea that all of these things coexist as a possible kind of urbanism. So next I'm going to tell you about Caruso St John. So this is a city you all know well. And here is the address. This is Caruso St John and Plaza George Orwell, which I understand is sometimes called Plaza Trippy. And so this is an apartment that was bought by two brothers. They grew up partly in Barcelona, and one now lives in Hong Kong, and one lives in London. And they asked me to refurbish it after they lived there as students, but now want to return to the city for holidays. And we were very interested in how this project could be about Barcelona, about a love affair with the city. So the other thing that was very interesting for me as a kind of naturalized British person was that immediately adjacent to the apartment is Plaza George Orwell, and that this was the English writer's commemoration for his contribution to the Spanish Civil War, which he wrote about in homage to Catalonia. And I think one's constantly aware, particularly if you're working in construction, at the strength of Catalan identification with local culture. And I suppose historically there is no one more than George Orwell who has communicated that to a British audience. And so again, I felt that this was culturally significant for me in doing this project that this relationship existed. And this is the apartment, so these are all fragments, and I think what I want to communicate in these images is that there was no single viewpoint. It was an interior with many divisions and many centres and no identification with its position in the city or the very unique geometry of the streets and Plaza George Orwell. So we started to investigate what we would keep and what we would transform. And we thought the most beautiful elements were the ceilings. So there were these faience ceilings. And these we would keep, but we would remove the walls. And like the Diagonal in Barcelona, we wanted to impress the client with how important the geometry of this very tight corner site was on Carrer Vinyó. And so we showed him examples of corner buildings, and perhaps the most extreme example is at this point in Manhattan, where Broadway, which is the only diagonal street in Manhattan, crosses the grid, and at every point it does so, it creates a triangular plot. And what I love about that particularly is that, of course, the diagonal street is the first street in Manhattan. It is the Native American trail that the grid was then placed over. So you then have these very conspicuous monuments, which if you ask what they relate to historically, they relate to the prehistory of the city. So depending on how you photograph this building, it has a very similar geometry. The apartment is here. This is Carrer Vinyó, and then Plaza George Orwell is just down there. So in terms of this engagement with the city, we wanted these conditions to be very palpable if you're living there. So each of the small rooms were divided one from another. And at the same time, I've been teaching for the last 10 years at London Metropolitan University. We were doing research trips with our students. And that year, we took all our students to Rome, and we surveyed Cosmati pavements in church floors. So Cosmati is a family of medieval stonemasons that invented a new technology for making mosaics, which is rather than all the mosaics being square, they would cut every stone to make new shapes. And they traveled around Europe creating the most beautiful and the most valuable floors for about a century and a half. And this is one that we surveyed in Rome, but there's also one, surprisingly, in Westminster Abbey in London, and it is under a carpet, and it is only ever shown to the public on a royal wedding. And this book is all about the meaning of the Cosmati floor that is underneath this carpet in Westminster Abbey in London. And I mean, obviously it's in English, but I would definitely recommend it if you find intricate floors exciting. It explains how the geometry of the floor is a description of the universe. That to a medieval observer, each of the elements represents a part of the cosmos. So there's earth, wind, fire, there's there's like the infinite, there's a whole gamut of ideas about God and perfection. And this was the moment at which medieval philosophy used geometry to describe the divine, and medieval masons used the same geometry to make this physical. So we surveyed with the students the church in which it was built, which is Santa Maria in Cosmedin. But then we also created a digital drawing of the same geometry. And then we laid, this is a drawing of the one laid on top of the other. So the distance between these two, the gap, that arguably is a metaphor for the kind of the challenge of making an image of something perfect, a reality. So I found this whole world, this whole story, fascinating. I think because of the possibility of putting so much content into something that culturally there are periods when one can take any surface or any decoration and possibly attempt to give that level of richness. And arguably in the 20th century, you know, God is in the detail, there's this reduction, to my mind, to a ridiculous point where the implication is like the surface of a marble sheet and how it meets a corner of a polished stainless steel column, that this level of complexity can be reduced to that level of articulation. And I find the pleasure in this, for me, much greater because of the greater invitation to read the content. It's like the labor, the work, the time, the discipline, the organization, the ritual in making it, to me, is the invitation to read it. And so I don't think today it's conceivable or desirable, or I would want to describe any God in a floor. But we came away from this survey trying to imagine what does one communicate today in architectural form. And maybe the city is one form of idealized world that one would try to represent. Another idea that I would introduce in Calle Vigno, and this is such a small project, and we're stuffing all these ideas in, but there we go. So this is 2 plates from a book about the history of architecture and how Chartres Cathedral is in fact the consequence of Pompeian wall paintings. So in the 19th century, theoreticians believed that Gothic architecture was really a structural device, that it was all about spanning large spaces. But these 2 slides are from a book that's arguing that, in fact, it's about making very large buildings out of lots of small houses. So every one of these is a house, and the whole building is a pile of heavenly mansions. And the title of the book is Heavenly Mansions, and it's written by John Summerson. And he believes that there is an architectural history that goes back to Pompeii of architecture always being made of smaller architecture. So if this is the room of a dining room in a Pompeian house, that room is made of a diminutive architecture and if this is on the wall, it's about so big, yeah? And maybe the room it's in is, maybe it's the width of that screen. But there's a smaller architecture, and then within it is another frame with a decorative architecture, and then within that there is an image of a garden. So rather than us imagining that making architecture is about structure, a technical problem, that we're only ever trying to make larger enclosures, or the problem is about how does one find the right beam to span the right space. This idea is that maybe all architecture is a representation of the domestic at different scales. So then I did a tour of houses in Europe that have very bourgeois living rooms, and these are places that were traditionally for entertaining guests. And this is the Villa Necchi by Portaluppi in Milan. And this is a similar kind of room. This is Pierre Chaureau's Maison de Verre. So this is in Paris, again, a room that's very much about inviting people to spend time a bit like in a bar, but in your house. And that was, I think, in around about the 1920s to 1940s, where a lot of cultural events took place. And you'll know this, La Barceloneta. So this is quite close to Carrer Vignaux, another building that I love. And Kodak patented these louvers and introduced these kind of indoor-outdoor spaces for each of these apartments. So, finally, I'm going to now bring all of these little stories and insert them in one small apartment. So, we removed all the walls, and then we designed a tile that, like the church floor in Rome, might speak of something bigger than itself. And this would be the city. So each tile has the same geometry as the corner of the apartment, which is the same geometry as Placha George Orwell. We then took the brief for 3 bedrooms, and we put Codex La Barceloneta as a miniature building, a tower, which has its own louvers. And then we took from the Maison de Verre a kind of a bookshelf that becomes another bedroom. And then from Portaluppi's Villa Necchi, there's this brass-framed, glazed enclosure. And then we inserted that as one very large piece of furniture within the apartment, so that you would keep the largest volumes and create this kind of aggregate architecture of small things adding up to make bigger things. And then we wanted to find the right people to make the floor. And this is Pierre Marty of Mosaic Marty. It's a third-generation encaustic tile manufacturer from Manresa. I recommend you all use their tiles. They are lovely people. And he makes every tile the factory makes in Manresa himself. So one man, every tile. And I don't know if you know the technology, but it's very simple. Dried cement with pigmented liquid concrete that's coloured, poured into a mould that's then pressed. And this is the workshop, and these you can see the tiles that eventually were made. And these are the types of mould. So these, you can have a bespoke metal mould made. So we started to look at molds and patterns that would be about this urban geometry. And this is actually a non-equilateral triangle. It is precisely the geometry of the apartment. And then we wanted to, there are two brothers who are the clients, and we wanted to both, in one room, designate two spaces, and we wanted to accentuate the appearance of this sweep around the corner in the apartment. And we also wanted to introduce a new idea into encaustic tile manufacturing, which is a 150-year-old technology. It was introduced in the 1850s. It replaced mosaic. So if the Cosmates introduced advanced mosaic in the 13th century. So they introduced triangular mosaic pieces, whereas before there were only square mosaic pieces. In the 1850s, encaustic tiles were introduced as a cheap replacement for mosaic. And so we were thinking, the reason there's very few encaustic tile manufacturers today is because encaustic tiles were replaced in the 1950s and 1960s by terrazzo. So you can see every few centuries, someone introduces a new technology which effectively ends the dominance of an older technology. And each of these technologies has a high point, and it has a moment in which it has most cultural value, and then it goes into decline. So we were presented with this encaustic technology, which is in decline, and we thought, is there anything left within this technology that could extend its life? And what we realized is that every encaustic tile we have ever seen is a repeated pattern. So if you go into, all over Barcelona, it's always the same tile, but it's always poured by hand. So you have to ask yourself, why are they all the same? And so we asked Pierre Marty, can you pour different colored pigments into the mold if we ask you and give you instructions? And he said, yes, it's, like that, and then I just do that. There's no different, there's no cost difference, there's no labor difference. And so we were able to then introduce a way of changing the color of the floor to match the corner, changing it from green to red, and that this would be the green end for one brother, this would be the red end, and then where they'd meet would be the place where it was most mixed, and there we would put a table for them to get together with their families. So then this is the result, is pigmented encaustic tiles that change color, that follow the turn in the street. And this is a model that we made in the office. So this is about so big, made of foam core at 1 to 20 scale, and you can begin to see the effect. And here you can perhaps see, so this is the kind of Portalupi, this kind of watery green. And there's the Kodak apartment building. So I'm now going to show you actually the final thing built. So you can see all of it. So all of this process took years. I mean, it was one small apartment, but we were probably doing this for like 3 years. Probably can't do it for every job, but I think we're now trying to work out how can we keep doing this, but on bigger projects. So there's the apartment. And here's the front door. So the door is standard to the building. So now you can see the tiles and the La Barceloneta. And this has quite a theatrical effect, so you come in and when you pull the door, it slides a bit like a kind of theatre set. And then it provides balconies, and so each bedroom has its own bathroom. So from this bedroom you can go into a bathroom there, from this bedroom, the bathroom there. And then here you can see the green turning to red, and there's the table, and the bookshelves from the Maison de Verre. And this kind of indoor-outdoor architecture, and a staircase up to a bedroom and the balcony. You can see the colours again. And then we retained all the faience ceilings. This is on the balcony, so you can see the steelwork with very simple clasp fittings holding the glass. And these are José Javier Blach's photographs, who did a really fantastic job. I should also say Ángel Martín Cojo was the project architect, and so he's based in Barcelona, and he's an architect that worked in London, where I met him. And so this whole project was done through working with him, and he was on site every week with Brixie, who are the contractor. And then, so here it's at its most red, and there's the kitchen, and the staircase you can use to get to the books, and then at the end of the day to go to bed. And so, to go back to the beginning of the lecture, I kind of feel like I'm trying to kind of pull all these little bits from, I think we very much wanted the experience of being in this apartment to be about visiting Barcelona, but then that it would also be about access to Barcelona, not just the city that you see, but the city, like the city's industry, the people that are involved, and somehow now for the client, every one of these, every small part of this apartment carries some story about the city, the people, Catalan culture. So this is the bedroom, and then of course you can close this at night. Okay. So I'll take a quick pause. So the second project is, it's a similar project in London. So as a pair, I think they start to allow our office to speculate about a theory or a general approach to the relationship between interiors and cities. So this was an open competition. This was the brief. It was published in the UK Architectural Press, and it's an unusual brief. It was for a one-room hotel. It would be for the 2012 Olympic year. Every night a different guest would stay, and every month an artist would stay aboard and create a new work. And that this room was meant to be a place for contemplating visitors' relationship to London and to the wider world. So in a way, we couldn't imagine a better brief for a space about a relationship to a city. I mean, effectively that was the brief. And the brief was written by Living Architecture, which is an organisation run by Alain de Botton, who's a British writer. And project is to build small houses by architects that allow people to experience contemporary architecture who otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity. And the next house is by Peter Zumthor, which opens this year in Devon, which is in southwest UK. The site was given. It's the roof of this building. So this is the River Thames. There's the London Eye. And this is the South Bank Centre, which is the largest single-site cultural venue in Europe. And one of the questions that we asked ourselves is, what is the site that this hotel room will refer to? And I think that very early on, the importance of the Thames, of the river, dominated the conversation. Also because probably the river, a bit like Broadway in New York, obviously preceded the city. The reason that the city is there is because of the Thames, and the Thames has defined the city's development. And if you look at the history of the Thames, so this is Canaletto's painting from 1747, the river has historically been really the lifeblood of the city. All of the trade and the UK's or England's position as a colonial power really spread from this river's connection to the world. The future of the river is also significant. So this is an image of London flooded, and so the London Eye becomes like a mill wheel. And again, we're very conscious of if one is wanting to contemplate one's relationship to a city, that the future is a lot to do with climate change and the environment, and this is a very real problem in the UK at the moment. And the other aspect that we wanted to engage with was stories about the city. And the reason this project was happening was because of the Olympic Games. So in 2012, there was a cultural Olympiad, so there was funding for arts events in this site. And we were quite conscious that the Olympics as a project is very much an imperial project, in that it was developed at the end of the 19th century at the height of European empires, or certainly the British Empire, and that somehow, again, any understanding of London during an Olympic year would need to understand possibly the original political and cultural context of the Olympics. And this novel, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, was written around the same time as the Olympics were created, the modern Olympics. And it's a story about a journey from London, the centre of an empire, to the edge of an empire, but into a heart of darkness. It's a kind of expose of the violence and the corruption and the horror at the heart of the economical growth of an empire. And it's a very dark story in many ways, but it felt like, again, if one wanted to be truthful to the history of a city like London, then this is the truth. And this is the boat that Conrad actually sailed, the writer sailed up the Congo 10 years before he wrote Heart of Darkness. It was called the Roi des Belges, so King of the Belgians. So it was owned by the King of Belgium, who owned the Congo as a private enterprise. And so we decided that the response to the brief would be a one-room hotel in the shape of a boat that would be made of all the fragments within the text Heart of Darkness that describes the Roi des Belges. And that we would lift the boat onto the roof. And this is actually what we built. Okay. Do we have sound? No. One second, I'm just going to see. So it's quite unusual in its location, obviously, because this is the boat, and it performs every night as a hotel, but then once a month as a concert venue, and artists like either musicians or writers in residence. So the musicians perform in here, and then it is screened live in the auditorium below and online. And so here's a kind of walking tour through the building. So you go up a lift at the back of the building, and then across on a walkway. And you can see it's called Le Roi des Belges. And you can see it's boat-like form. We wanted the interior to be very different to the exterior. So if it appears as one thing from outside, from inside it is many things. So it has many small rooms inside it. And one inspiration for this was Sir John Soane's museum in London. Has anyone been to this? Do you know this project? So this is quite a small private museum for one architect in which he collected from around Europe architectural trophies. And it is possibly the best example of a kind of architecture which is completely full of a kind of history, of a memory, of an engagement with one man's obsession. And in many ways, the character of this interior evokes the same kind of feelings as reading. If there was a kind of spatial corollary to reading Heart of Darkness, it would be this interior. It is very strange, and one also has the sense that one can never quite understand it. So this is one of its interiors. So it has a kind of tent standing inside a room, and then one doesn't really understand whether that is inside or outside. This is another view of the same. There are these mirrors at every point. So this is the interior of the boat. So that's the other side of the door. There's again this kind of coloured light, and then these walls that retract. Behind them is a bathroom, and so there's a shaving mirror that is in front of a porthole that's in front of the London Eye and the clock face of Big Ben. So perhaps like the triangles in Cadet Vigno, this moment where maybe you're aware of being in a painting, that the circle closest to you with your face in is then matched again and again and again into the distance. And then this is then the first room that you come into, and there's an octagonal card table, which is a reference to another Conrad novel. And the strange thing about this project was that we put all these literary references into the boat, not knowing whether anyone would ever discover them. And then the writers in residence were chosen because some of them were Conrad specialists, and suddenly they're writing about the octagonal card table from Lord Jim, another novel by Conrad, where the protagonist from Heart of Darkness, Marlowe, appears again in another novel. So there's this kind of, it's trying to be an access to many different worlds. And here's the view, and then you go through into the bedroom, which closes like that. And then this is Sir John Soane's museum again, which has all the walls of the galleries open to reveal more walls, more gallery, and then eventually other rooms. And so, again, to create this layered character to the interior, we created cabinets which would have layers of drawings in. So these are maps of the Congo. That's actually a drawing of Sir John Soane's designs for the Bank of England in ruins, and the Bank of England can be seen from this window. So some of these references, there's not really enough time to go into all of them. And then there's a staircase up into a lookout library, which has then a crow's nest, and this provides about half the power that it needs, and is modelled on this church spire in London, Christchurch Spitalfields by Hawksmoor, which is a pyramidal spire which has an octagonal room inside it. So inside this tower is a hidden octagonal studio. And this is the interior of our studio, which is where the writers in residence are invited to stay and write. And there's one book left for them, which is the logbook of the Roi des Belges. And you can then write the time, your location, the course, the tide, the water surface, the weather, and it goes on across 2 pages. So you become a sailor or a traveller in this boat for a night, invited to write a story. Of course, this idea of a story within a story, or a painting within a painting, or a room within a room. In Heart of Darkness, the first page is begins with a story in a story. So Marlowe, a sailor, is sitting in a boat in London telling other people about a journey he once made on a different boat from London to the Congo. And then the whole story unfolds. So there's this kind of Russian doll, kind of babushka story. And then this space was used for performances every month. And this is an actor reading Conrad's Upriver Diaries, which describe the journey that he actually made on the Roi des Belges that then was fictionalized in Heart of Darkness. And that's the view from the roof. It's also, I think, it's also important to see the kind of, I suppose, the contrast between the architecture of the centre of the city and, you know, this building or non-building. And you can go up through the roof in the library. So here's the library, which had all of the works of Conrad and guides to the architecture of London and the history of the British Empire. And so every month an artist was invited to perform aboard, and this is an example. It's absolutely tiny on this. So these are all performed in the boat and then relayed into the South Bank Centre and online. So once a month. And I think this idea that it became about the Thames, it looks like you're in a boat. That's fine. And then, as well as 12 musicians, there were 12 writers in residence. And the first was Juan Gabriel Vázquez, who actually was a Conrad specialist, and he's the author who wrote about all of the clues that he found in the boat that he understood were to do with other texts. And this is, I think the next slide is a very short story from him, very short.
Our favorite novels are like buildings we know well. Who lives where the witch stairs lead, how to reach the basements. Today, however, Heart of Darkness is not a building, but a steamboat in which I've been sailing all my writing life, and whose private geography, its pilot house, its cabin, its mess room, I know as well as the house I grew up in.
So the 12 essays have now become a book in English, but that gives these 12 interpretations of staying a night aboard and a story related to it. Now, I think
from the vantage point of my boat here on top of the Queen Elizabeth Hall on the south bank of the river, I'm witnessing iconic London, iconic Britain. What I'm gazing upon is the familiar, hugely exportable, and in a sense very comfortable public face of Britain. Soon after arriving on the boat, the suggestive rootedness and unself-reflective confidence of these buildings, for instance, the self-conscious grandeur of the Savoy Hotel directly across the river, began to irritate me. Yesterday, I finally gave up and jumped on a Thames clipper and headed off downriver in search of another vision of London. And of course, I found it. The historic buildings of Bankside and Shakespeare's Globe gave way to the Tower of London, and then the astonishing array of modern flats around the newly revamped Isle of Dogs. The Dubai-like spectacle of Canary Wharf appears almost like a mirage, and beyond this, there's the glory of Greenwich Palace, and then the extraterrestrial vision of the O2 Arena. And beyond this, well, less development and a reminder of an earlier unregenerated Thames. I went in search of other visions of London and found many Londons, which on my return to my own little rooftop boat made me feel slightly more comfortable with my iconically powerful view. After all, it's just a view, right? One which carries the authority and the weight of power, but no more representative of London than the Isle of Dogs or the underdeveloped wastelands beyond Greenwich. But tell that to the tourists, or to Moses Alouetta, standing motionless on the banks of the Thames and wanting to belong, but wanting to belong to this London on my gentle bend in the river, not those Londons to the east, to this idea of London and Britain that constitutes my view. Can it really be true that not all views are equal? And if this is the case, is it possible or even desirable to make the narrative embedded in the view of London that is spread out before me available to everybody in Britain? Not for the first time, I'm glad that Mr. Conrad's boat has come equipped with window blinds.
So, forgive me, I kind of feel like it's quite demanding for a non-English speaking audience to give you all of this stuff. But I hope that was helpful in it. It's the story written aboard the boat by Carol Phillips, and Carol is a second generation British author whose parents came from the Caribbean, and a lot of his literature is about the African diaspora. And when he was deliberately invited aboard because of the views that he would have about Conrad and writing about empire. And for him, the story that you heard was about looking out the window at central London and this imperial architecture, so for example of the Savoy Hotel, and asking himself, is this the architecture that everyone feels represents their world or their Britishness? And that, unsatisfied with this view, he decides to go on this voyage on a boat down the river to find other Londons, and that he feels that he does find other Londons, that maybe those other Londons are more comfortable, and it raises the question of, for him, when he comes back, why is it that the centre of this city doesn't feel like a city with an architecture that everybody identifies as the centre of their world? And I found this a very powerful story, and one that just gave added strength to perhaps this argument that one can embed within architectural language a social narrative, and that maybe these two offer a spectrum of choice. There is actually one other project in this in this slideshow, and I'm going to show it very quickly because it's at the end. But I think this is a speculative project that we did last year, and I think it's trying to suggest how this attitude might change a whole city. So it's called River Rooms. It was a competition which we won it was for ideas about the Thames. And we said that London should be much more aware of the public spaces that are immediately on the river. And at the moment, we're not. This is Venice. This is St. Mark's. This is a city that really understands the value of its public spaces adjacent to its river. That is a public room. It's 60 meters wide. It's the point of arrival and departure from the city. It's not only a void within the city, it has an architecture that is entirely about signifying its cultural and ritual role. And so it's not just an architecture of real estate and offices and residences. There's a kind of celebratory representational architecture to do with arriving and departing. And that there are potentially 56 sites that we found in London that could become such points of arrival and departure. And this coincides with a desire for a growth in river transport in London, and that at the moment, so the Olympics also brought about a massive increase in river traffic. And do you remember that slide that I showed you of the Thames painted by Canaletto, and you realize quite how many ships did once use the Thames as a thoroughfare. It's also environmentally very sustainable to travel by river in the city. So we said these 56 spaces would all need to be well connected, both to their physical and cultural contexts. That like St. Mark's, they should all be both local and universal. I mean, you know that you're in a very particular place, but you also understand you're in a city. That they should not be afraid to celebrate their position as cultural sites of ritual performance. So architecture is civic theatre and not just real estate. And that it's all about these things happening. So chants, music, rallies. And we mapped all of the sites where this might happen. And we then tried to argue that London has historically turned its back on the Thames, that this was once, as a public space, the centre of the city. This is another Canaletto painting of the Lord Mayor's celebration. And that this is what happened to it at the end of the 19th century. Buildings were built facing away from the Thames, and this is where you put your rubbish. Now we have a situation where developers realize that the Thames creates a nice view, so you get lots of private space that is only, the only value is the view from a window, and we want it to be a lot more. And so this is what Richard Rogers proposed in 1984, London as it could be. And he proposed creating massive infrastructural projects that put roads and transport beneath the Thames and created public spaces along the entire length. And the competition that we won was to revise these ideas 20 years on. And we thought that it should be much more about specific sites that work with the specific character of the existing city. So here's an example, Battersea. Historically, it was pleasure gardens. Now it's a very little used park, relatively speaking, but it's right by the Thames. This is a massive regeneration project, turning a power station into a big cultural venue with housing. And why couldn't we make this one of the largest public spaces in London with a new river terminal, and that would become an example river room. So the biggest public space for a generation. And at the other extreme, right out at the edge of the city, so do you remember that photograph of the couple standing by the river? That's here. And even further out, it looks a bit like this. So it's real wilderness. At the moment, you cannot get there by boat. So we proposed that you would extend the river network further east. And in the same way that a century ago, the underground was promoted as a way to reach the edges of London for pleasure, so the river would do the same. And this is Rainham Marshes now. It's a kind of very beautiful bird sanctuary, and this is the kind of bird visitors centre. And this is what we're proposing, a kind of arrival point with a kind of celebratory architecture. So wilderness, 1 hour by boat from Embankment. So from the centre of London, you could go to the edge of London by boat in an hour. And so this is the proposal, that there are these types of spaces, and that these are the 3 key examples. And we're actually working on trying to build the Rainham Marshes one for the Thames Festival in 2016 with an extended riverboat network that would mean you could arrive here and hire a bike and travel around the marshes. So thank you, that's the end.
Thank you very much, David, for your lecture. And now we have a turn for questions. Today we have 2 special guests. One is Felix Aranz from Escalae, he's a critic from Barcelona, and the other is Chechu Zavala, that is the director of Quaderns. So maybe you have a question for David, or if not, we could open the micro for all the public, all the students. Okay.
I would like to make a comment. Thank you, David, for the amazing lecture. It seems like there's a deep interest on you on the theme on navigation, on the ships, on the kind of devices you build into the houses that sometimes they resemble some kind of cabins, ship cabins, and things like that. That is a constant in your work. So, yeah. Is there something attached that you have this interest? Is something that is? Are you really conscious about this?
When you ask me that, I immediately think of probably my childhood, and so I was born in Cape Town in South Africa, and my parents are South African, and we emigrated to London when I was 4 years old, and I only became British when I was about 11 years old. So everyone assumes I'm British, and I'm very happy. I mean, I've had a wonderful life in Britain. I think it's an amazing country. But I think I always my early understanding of the place was probably as someone who arrived there. It wasn't mine, it was mine to find. And certainly for my parents, who moved when they were in their 20s and 30s, it was foreign. And I think I always dreamed of traveling as a child. I always wanted to see other places, and I always wanted to make my home in such a way that would both, for me, achieve some kind of a kind of domesticity, but one that was potentially transient, or that was translatable, or that would move or evolve. My first day at architecture school as a student, I was asked to bring one drawing of a place that I loved, and it was the drawing of the inside of a tent. So I guess I just always loved traveling, or having a domestic life, but one that is mobile.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Also, David. In fact, you talk about naturalized British, about yourself. At the beginning, I heard I am a naturalized British man, or something like that. For me, it was funny because this term naturalized, because I felt that you are strongly Londonicized, more than that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I would like to ask you about your personal feeling about yourself. I mean, in my opinion, your work has a strong personal scheme, and it is expressing your own celebration, your own world, sharing with the others maybe, but anyway, your world. So for me, there are two questions. One is how you share it when you are working, when you are designing. Which are the ways you use to share this thing of needing the others to resolve your work?
Yeah.
And the other is that as you teach, what do you teach?
Yeah, okay, so the way in which we work in the office is I am most effective drawing if I'm talking to somebody else. I just draw quicker, I draw more clearly. So if I want the design to move quickly, I need to talk to somebody. So in a way, the design process is most effective the more conversations we have. So in fact, we began to realize that if we wanted to win competitions, we had to stop working and talk to each other at least 3 times a day. So everyone works, and then we pin it all up, and then we talk about it, and then we work, and then we pin it all up, and it just over and over and over and over. And so it's incredibly iterative, and the resolution is constantly being deferred. And I think that extends to working with other people, is that I'm very comfortable with leaving something, an idea, and moving on to another idea. So if we meet someone and they say, I know how to make this like this, we'll say like, oh, that's great. Why don't we do it like that? And then so it's just constantly accumulating content. And then if you talk to people, then naturally bits fall off as well. And then the hope is you get to a point where it just feels like it's well cooked. You know, you have all the ingredients. And then in terms of teaching, I think I teach with other people, so I've taught for most of the last 10 years with Sylvia Ullmeyer, who she has her own practice, and other people. I think we very much try to teach students to be able to develop their own worlds, to develop their own ideas, to give them the facility to construct, to develop their imaginations. We don't have a very strict style. Like if you look at all our students' work, it doesn't all look like my work or a famous architect's work. It all looks different. And I think we would like them to feel that what they learnt was how to have confidence in their own creativity and their own choices, and to be able to debate those choices so that they have some political and social value. But, yeah.
More questions? Students? No? There are one there.
Hello. Thanks very much for your lecture.
Pleasure.
It's a question about your apartment in Avignon that you made.
Yeah.
You were saying that it was supposed to be, or that it was referred very much to Barcelona, coming and visiting Barcelona. So it's more a question is how you did implement Codex work into it. Why did you implement two other pieces of work? Very interesting, very nice, but from completely different places.
Yes.
I mean, of course, you could have maybe come up with something else, also more local. I don't know, just a question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you mentioned why that was.
Yeah.
And second, on the river room, was it your idea that sprung from from Conrad's book of the Congo, or was that somebody from your team?
Yeah. So the first one about why is one fragment from Barcelona and other fragments from other cities. So if I was to say to you which cities in the 20th century had the strongest, this maybe represents a kind of British bias to an understanding of Europe. But if I try to imagine bourgeois culture and the idea of the kind of private public space, so a kind of salon where you would invite people to come to your house, but to behave like they're in public in a way, which I think is a kind of provocative type to look at today, because we have been so anti-bourgeois in so many aspects of domestic architecture. I think that we should be talking more about the public life of the private sphere, but the places that I think of or that I have had access to are not Barcelona, and so Paris, Vienna, Milan, and maybe it's to do with the history, the 20th century history of Barcelona. And I wouldn't claim to be an expert by any means, but when I've travelled to Barcelona, I've been more aware of say, 20th century apartment, kind of mass apartment architecture, or even Gaudi, it's not as bourgeois. There is not so much, there are not so many examples in this city of privileged individual houses that I'm aware of. And I wanted to introduce in this apartment this atmosphere of a kind of European salon. So that's, maybe it's you can tell me of whether these three fantastic examples of Barcelona interiors. The other question about Heart of Darkness, and so if I didn't say before, the project's a collaboration with Fiona Banner, who's a British artist, and so the brief invited architects to collaborate with other creative disciplines, and we asked Fiona, who's a very celebrated artist in the UK, who we'd worked with before, if she would collaborate with us. And several of her works in the past have referred to Heart of Darkness. So we invited her to collaborate with us and proposed a boat, and then we together looked at a whole range of literary precedents. So the Bible was there for a while, and I think at the interview we read fragments of maybe 15 texts that were stories about boats in London. But then gradually, Heart of Darkness became, it kind of developed into that being the kind of, actually, the densest, richest point of departure. So we would never have had the confidence to do that project without Fiona's involvement. And I don't think she would have ever built an interior, because she's a sculptor, and she works with sculpture and a lot of text-based work, and she wouldn't have wanted to do a building without us. So it was very much to do with that relationship.
So thank you very much, David, for your lecture and for your work. And we can continue the conversation outside with a beer. And the exit is from that door today. And the beer is in the Aula Jardín. Okay? Thank you.